What's up guys, Truck Palmer here. Today I will take you through the steps to properly replace the Sparx plug in any Toyota 3.5 liter V6 engine. I know this job can be intimidating, but it may not be difficult if you follow these steps closely. The big challenge is that in order to get access to the Sparx plug, the intake manifold will have to be removed. The challenge doesn't stop there. Removing the intake manifold can be quite a task because there are two 12mm bolts at the back that can be difficult to remove. It's really not as hard as it seems. I will take you through the entire process. This video might be a little long because I won't skip any step. Iridium Sparx plug are installed in this vehicle, which should be replaced every 120,000 miles. The Carfax report for this vehicle is up to date, which shows that the last time the Sparx plugs were replaced, the mileage was at 107,033 miles. The current mileage is 260,045 miles, which means that the Sparx plug should have been replaced over 33,000 miles ago. Even though these Sparx plugs are working properly, they should have been replaced long ago. Let's take a look at all the items needed to do this job. Of course, 6 Sparx plugs, and I got these from a Toyota dealer for a total of $66.96. I highly recommend using genuine OEM parts. These are iridium made by Denso. These are intake manifold gaskets, and all 3 cost $20.76. These should be replaced for this job. 1 throttle body gasket, which costs $4.29, and this should be replaced as well. So the total cost for these service parts is $92.01 plus tax and shipping costs. These are the tools I'll be using: a 5mm X socket, a 10mm socket, and I might need this swivel extension, a 5/8 Sparx plug socket with this swivel design extension, which makes working in small spaces easier, this 12mm wrench with a socket-like end, a ratchet handle, and this impact driver, which will speed up the process. It is not necessary though. So an overview of all the steps that will be taken. Loosen the 4 5mm X bolts and 2 10mm nuts on the intake manifold. Remove the air filter box and tube. Remove the throttle body. Remove the 2 hard-to-reach 10mm bolts at the back that supports the intake manifold, one on the left here and the other on the right. Remove the intake manifold. Remove the ignition coil. Remove the old Sparx plug and install the new ones. Reinstall the intake manifold with the new gaskets. Reinstall the throttle body with the new gasket. Reinstall the air filter box with tube. Then finally, replace the 3 Sparx plug at the front and the job is done. All these steps can be done in 1 hour if you follow these steps. But if you're not used to working on cars, this can take a little over 2 hours depending on your skill level. Let's get started. Let's remove the engine cover. So there are 3 Sparx plug at the front and 3 at the back, hidden by this intake manifold. I will need to remove this air filter box as well as the throttle body to get access to the 12mm bolt on this side. And over the other side, I will only need to remove this wire connector here to get access to the 12mm bolt on this side. If you think that you need more space to work, you will need to remove some additional parts to create more working space. To get more working space, remove the windscreen wipers, remove this plastic cover, remove the windscreen wiper motor under this plastic cover, and finally remove some bolts that hold this entire piece in place. Removing these additional parts is more work, but it provides more working space. Bear in mind that some sedans with a V6 engine, like some Lexus motor cars, will require the removal of these additional parts to create more working space. The removal of these additional parts is not necessary for this vehicle, so let's get started. Remove the mass airflow sensor connector. Undo these 2 clips. Remove this hose. Remove another hose over here. Undo this clamp to remove the hose from the throttle body. Now I can remove the tube from the throttle body. I recommend totally removing this air filter box to have more workspace. Remove this clip at the back to remove the mass airflow sensor wires. Always check this air filter box for oil, which would be a sign of a bad PCV valve. Now, let's remove the throttle body. Disconnect the wire harness for the throttle body by squeezing the clip at this side and pull. I will now remove these 4 bolts that secure the throttle body to the intake manifold. There is no need to remove these coolant hoses. I will put all nuts and bolts in this magnetic pan to not lose any. Remember to secure this bracket for the throttle body wire when reinstalling the throttle body. So the throttle body is off. This gasket will be replaced with a new one. Now it's time to remove the 12mm bolt at the back. I recommend loosening the 4 5mm X bolts and the 2 10mm nuts on the intake manifold before removing the 12mm bolt here. This will allow the 12mm bolt to be removed easily by hand after it is broken loose with the wrench. I will try to use this GoPro camera to give you a view as to where exactly this 12mm bolt is. So the bolt is right there. In my experience, this 12mm wrench with a socket-like end works easiest, but you can use a socket set with a drive that can be adjusted at different angles. It might be a little challenge to place the wrench over the bolt, but once that is done and the bolt is broken loose, it can be easily removed by hand. If the 4 X bolts and the 2 10mm nuts and the intake manifold are loosened, this bolt could be easily removed by hand, but I will take my time to remove this bolt with the wrench. So this 12mm bolt is out. Let's move to the other one. Remove this electrical connector out of the way to create working space. I will use this GoPro camera again to try show you exactly where the bolt is. As you can see, it is right there. I am going to reach in with this 12mm wrench using my left hand to break the bolt. Knowing where the bolt is located will make feeling for it easier. Once the bolt is broken, I can then use my hand to remove it completely. So there is the second 12mm bolt out. Now with these 2 bolts out, the most difficult part of this job is done. Now I can remove the intake manifold. So now I will use this 5mm hex socket to remove the 4 X bolt, and I will also use the 10mm socket to remove the 2 10mm nuts. I will use the impact driver to speed up the process. Let's remove this hose and the Pcv valve hose out of the way. This is how the X bolts look. This stud came out, but it is not a problem for me. I will remove the nut from the stud with the assistance of a locking pliers. The second 10mm nut is off, and I am going to use this pointy nose pliers to carefully remove the other X bolts so they do not fall. Now, the intake manifold can be removed. Just ensure that you lift before you pull to create clearance for the bracket on the left side. Just push the intake manifold to the side. So the intake manifold is off, and I immediately discovered a problem. I can see oil on the intake manifold gaskets coming from the intake manifold. It is not a lot, and I'm happy I caught it early. The oil can possibly get here from the engine coming through the piston rings, but this is not the case because no oil is in these chambers here. It is definitely the Pcv valve which might be stuck open. I will replace this very soon, so look out for that video explaining the different signs of a bad Pcv valve and how to replace it. It is remarkable that a cheap $5 part like this Pcv valve can create a lot of problem for the engine. I normally recommend genuine OEM parts because they usually fit properly and last a long time. The only problem with genuine OEM parts, they tend to cost more. I am carefully removing these gaskets to avoid any dirt falling inside these chambers. Now you can see the oil on the gaskets. Cover these holes with a microfiber rag to avoid anything falling inside. Remember the position of this hose and ensure it is right here when reinstalling the intake manifold. To create space to remove the ignition coils and Sparx plugs, I will remove these 10mm nuts from these 3 brackets that hold this wire harness. Now it's time to remove the electrical connectors from the ignition coils. Then I can remove the ignition coils. My technique to remove these connectors is to squeeze the clips on the wire harness, then rock and pull. All plugs are now off, so now I can remove the 10mm nuts holding the ignition coils in place. To remove this last ignition coil, I need to completely remove this nut here that holds the wire harness in place. Those are the 3 coils. It's time to remove the Sparx plugs. I will be using this 5/8 Sparx plug socket with this swivel extension. I will feed the socket in each Sparx plug channel and use a ratchet driver to remove each Sparx plug. So that one is out. 2 more to go. That's number 2. And that's number 3. Time to install the new Sparx plug. Place the new Sparx plug in the 5/8 socket. Then remove this protective plastic. No anti-seize solution is needed if you're using genuine OEM Sparx plug and tighten to specification, which should be 13 foot-pounds. Insert the Sparx plug in each cylinder while avoiding any impact to the tip of the Sparx plug, because a slight impact may change the gap adjustment here. After the Sparx plug is in, tighten as much as possible by hand, then use the torque wrench to tighten to 13 foot-pounds or 156 inch-pounds. Please do not over-tighten these guys. Do this for all 3 Sparx plug here. All 3 Sparx plugs are in, so it's time to reinstall the ignition coils. Secure each ignition coil with the 10mm bolt, then reconnect the wire harness for each coil. Check all wires to ensure they are properly connected and secure wire harness with their brackets and 10mm nuts. It's time to install the intake manifold and replace the old gaskets. Remove the microfiber rag and brush away any dirt or dust that may fall in these holes. I will reinstall this stud that came out earlier, then carefully align the intake manifold over these studs. Reinstall all 4 5mm X bolts. A pointy nose pliers can be used to place the X bolts in the holes to avoid them from falling. Install the two 10mm bolts. I will not tighten these down as yet. I need to install the two 12mm bolts by hand to the back of the intake manifold. It might be difficult to get the bolt started. My technique is to use my right hand here while facing the windscreen and feel for where the bolt should be installed. Shift the intake manifold around if you find getting the bolt started a little difficult. The bolt is now in and I will use the 12mm wrench to tighten this, but not too tight. Now let's move to the other side. Feel for where the 12mm bolt should go, then get it started. After it is in, tighten with the 12mm wrench. Since I am already on this side working, I am going to reinstall the throttle body with the new throttle body gasket before tightening the intake manifold with the 4 hex bolt and 10mm nuts. Remember the bracket holding the throttle body sensor wires here. I didn't install the bracket at this point, but I will do so later. Tighten the bolts for the throttle body to 7 foot-pounds. Guys, remember the intake manifold is plastic, so do not over-tighten these. Now I have to remove this bolt to install the bracket for the throttle body wires. Now I can tighten all 4 5mm hex bolts in a crisscross pattern to 13 foot-pounds and the 10mm nuts to 12 foot-pounds. Install this hose here. Now I can reinstall the Pcv hose. Now I can reinstall the air filter box and tube. Fasten these 2 clips. Reinstall the mass airflow sensor clip. Then connect the mass airflow sensor wire to the mass airflow sensor. This hose go right here. And this hose go right here. Tighten this clamp that holds the air filter tube to the throttle body. I know that was a lot of work, but the job is not done. Remember the 3 Sparx plug at the front as well. I will brush away some dirt and dust right here to prevent anything from falling in the holes where the Sparx plugs are. Remove each connector for each ignition coil. My technique is to squeeze, rock the connector and pull. Now remove these 10mm bolts and remove the ignition coils. Use the 5/8 Sparx plug sockets to remove the Sparx plug and install the new ones. Tighten each Sparx plug to 13 foot-pounds or 156 inch-pounds. Reinstall the ignition coils and secure with the 10mm bolts. Reinstall the wire harness and the job is finally done. Remember to make note of your current mileage to know when it's time to replace these again, which is 120,000 miles later. I use the Carfax app to keep track of this. Let's start up the engine to see if everything works. Everything sounds good, and I hope this video helped. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, please like, share and subscribe. Also, hit the notification bell to be notified as soon as I upload a new video. See you on the next one, guys.